If Russian strikes keep landing, why does Ukraine's war machine refuse to shatter? This is the central riddle confounding analysts, policymakers, and military historians alike. Every week, it seems, new reports emerge of Russian missiles hurtling toward Ukrainian cities and strategic targets. Each wave is described as more precise, more devastating, and more disruptive than the last. Command centers are hit, supply depots go up in flames, and the arteries of the nation's infrastructure are battered. Still, Ukraine's war effort persists, defiant, adaptive, and sometimes seemingly unbreakable. Over the last several months, Russia has orchestrated wave after wave of methodical, high-precision attacks that reach deep into Ukrainian territory. These are not random acts of violence. They are deliberate, orchestrated, and guided by a clear objective: to cripple Ukraine's ability to sustain its defense. Key command centers, supply depots, rail junctions, energy facilities, and even underground bunkers have all been targeted. Some of the most dramatic strikes have landed at the heart of major cities like Kyiv and Odessa. For instance, in late October, Russian forces executed a sweeping barrage across multiple regions, including Kyiv and Odessa. One of the most notable attacks was a direct hit on a heavily fortified underground command post, which was rumored to shelter senior Nato officers. This strike pierced the very core of Ukraine's decision-making infrastructure. In a parallel move, a ferry loaded with critical Western-supplied weaponry was sunk in Odessa, reportedly resulting in casualties among NATO and Romanian military escorts. This incident not only exposed the vulnerability of Western involvement, but also sent shockwaves through Allied capitals from Bucharest to Brussels. Beyond these headline-grabbing events, the Russian campaign has systematically targeted airfields, air defense hubs, drone launching sites, and the lifelines of the Ukrainian logistics network. Each strike is aimed at eroding Ukraine's ability to maneuver, defend its airspace, and equip its troops. The result is a slow but steady attrition of capacity, a campaign reminiscent of the strategic bombing campaigns in World War II, when Allied bombers sought to grind down German industry and morale by relentless, targeted attacks on critical infrastructure. Yet, in spite of this relentless pressure, Ukraine's military-industrial complex keeps functioning. Factories continue to produce equipment, air defenses intercept missiles and drones, and battalions rotate to the front lines. The resilience of Ukraine's war machine is not just a matter of luck or willpower. It is the result of careful planning, ingenious engineering, and a network of international support that together forge a system designed to survive catastrophe. This raises a pivotal question. What hidden engine keeps this machinery running under such unyielding assault? What structural, cultural, or strategic factors allow Ukraine not just to survive, but to adapt and persist? To answer these questions, we must look beyond the visible destruction of buildings and bridges. We need to explore the invisible arteries, the logistics, the political calculations, the industrial adaptations that are the true lifeblood of modern warfare. If we focus only on the explosions and shifting front lines, we risk misunderstanding the deeper dynamics that will ultimately determine the outcome of this war. The stakes could not be higher. At risk is not only the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but also the reputations of nations, the future balance of power in Europe, and the very lives of millions of civilians. Each decision in this crucible will echo far beyond Ukraine's borders, influencing security doctrines, alliance structures, and the trajectory of global politics for decades to come. Let us break down not just what is happening, but why the latest moves could tip the scales in ways few expect. This is not simply a contest of armies, but a battle of systems, endurance, and the capacity for adaptation. To understand the machinery that keeps Ukraine in the fight, consider the unique design of its industrial and military infrastructure. Many of Ukraine's key factories, for example, were built during Soviet times with the explicit purpose of surviving even a nuclear war. These facilities are often partially underground, protected by thick layers of concrete, with hidden workshops, backup generators, and vast emergency stockpiles. Imagine a tank factory near Kharkiv, its main assembly line destroyed by a missile, but production shifting overnight to a concealed sub-basement, where engineers and machinists continue their work by the light of diesel generators. This principle of redundancy is not unique to Ukraine. It echoes the strategies employed by Britain during the Second World War, when aircraft manufacturing was dispersed into dozens of small, hidden workshops across the countryside to survive the Blitz. In modern Ukraine, when a missile strike levels one production site, the work is quickly relocated to another, often improvised location. Redundant systems and pre-planned evacuations enable the continued assembly of munitions, drones, and vehicles, ensuring that the military machine keeps moving despite the barrage. However, Ukraine is not fighting alone. Western support has become the backbone of its resistance. The United States, Germany, Poland, the United Kingdom, France, and other allies have established a constant flow of weapons, spare parts, and financial aid. When repairs cannot be made on Ukrainian soil due to the destruction or threat of attack, damaged vehicles and equipment are transported across the border, often into Poland or the Czech Republic, for refurbishment. Once restored, these assets are sent back to the front lines. This cross-border supply chain is reminiscent of historical wartime logistics, such as the Lend-Lease Act during the Second World War, when the United States provided Britain and the Soviet Union with the equipment and resources needed to withstand Nazi aggression. Today, Ukraine's logistics teams show similar ingenuity, converting civilian trucks, empty barns, abandoned factories, and even rural back roads into critical arteries for the war effort. For example, during the winter of 2023, when Russian strikes knocked out major rail lines in central Ukraine, logisticians rerouted supplies through a patchwork of secondary roads and rural tracks, using civilian vehicles and even horse-drawn carts in some instances. This type of improvisation, while labor-intensive, kept vital ammunition and medical supplies flowing to embattled frontline units. Yet, as the war drags on, Russian strategy has evolved. Early in the conflict, Russian attacks often focused on headline-grabbing targets, large ammunition dumps, tank columns, or conspicuous command centers. But over time, the campaign has shifted toward a more systematic, attritional approach. Now, the targets are the power stations, substations, communication towers, bridges, and railway hubs that enable the entire Ukrainian war effort. This shift echoes the strategy adopted by the United States in its air campaign against North Vietnam during Operation Rolling Thunder, where the aim was to gradually wear down the enemy's ability to wage war by targeting the infrastructure that sustained it. In Ukraine, the goal is similar: to erode the country's resilience by targeting its energy grid and logistical backbone. The consequences of this new phase are profound. No power means no production. When substations are destroyed, factories cannot operate. When rail hubs are reduced to craters, the flow of supplies stalls. Each precise strike on a rail junction, bridge, or substation does more than just disrupt traffic or production. It reverberates through the entire logistical system, multiplying the costs and challenges faced by Ukraine's defenders. For example, in early November, a series of missile strikes on the Dnipro region destroyed 3 key railway bridges. The resulting bottleneck forced Ukrainian logistics teams to reroute thousands of tons of ammunition and fuel over hundreds of kilometers of secondary roads. The added delay and vulnerability increased the risk to convoys, forced the diversion of scarce fuel, and strained the entire supply chain. To counter this campaign, Ukraine has built impressive reserves of diesel generators, imported tens of thousands of batteries, and deployed hundreds of mobile power units. Cities like Lviv and Kharkiv have become hubs for these emergency resources, stockpiling enough diesel to power hospitals and command centers for weeks at a time. However, each safeguard has its limits. Generators burn through fuel that must be delivered under fire. Batteries degrade and need constant replacement, relying on supply chains that are themselves vulnerable to attack. A telling example unfolded during the winter of 2022, when a major power station supplying Kiev was knocked offline. Within hours, mobile generators were rushed in, keeping the city's emergency services running. However, As fuel supplies dwindled and delivery convoys faced increasing danger, blackouts became more frequent, and non-essential services ground to a halt. This pattern, rapid adaptation followed by attritional strain, now defines much of Ukraine's war economy. When bridges collapse or railway hubs are reduced to rubble, trains cannot move, and trucks are trapped on the wrong side of a river. Fuel, spare parts, food, and medical supplies pile up, unable to reach the front lines. Each new disruption adds to the mounting pressure, triggering rolling blackouts and operational delays that ripple across entire provinces. Despite all this, a complete shutdown of Ukraine's war effort remains elusive. Achieving it would require overwhelming, persistent force and would carry enormous political and diplomatic risks for Russia. Instead, Russian forces have adopted a phased strategy, knocking out a substation here, a rail depot there, slowly eroding Ukraine's resilience, while avoiding the kind of massive escalation that could trigger a broader international response. This strategy is not new in military history. During the Korean War, United Nations forces sought to cripple North Korean supply by targeting bridges and railways, but complete interdiction proved impossible. Instead, a grinding war of attrition emerged, with both sides adapting, repairing, and improvising at every turn. For Ukraine, the challenge now is to maintain the capacity to repair, adapt, and import replacement equipment as reserves dwindle and backup systems begin to fail. Each new wave of attacks tests the limits of ingenuity and endurance. The margin for error shrinks as resources are consumed. The risk grows that manageable logistical setbacks could escalate into full-blown humanitarian crises, threatening heat, water, or medicine for civilians far from the front lines. The impacts of this infrastructure war extend far beyond the military sphere. Hospitals struggle to maintain power for critical surgeries when the grid fails. Households in cities like Zaporizhia or Dnipro face days without heat during freezing winters. Businesses close, unemployment rises, and the strain on morale and political stability increases. In the worst-case scenario, a cascading failure of energy and logistics could undermine the very will of the population to continue resisting. Yet, with every attack, both sides innovate and adapt. Ukrainian engineers have begun to pre-position repair teams and stockpiles of materials near likely targets. International partners have accelerated deliveries of mobile power units and spare parts. For example, after a series of strikes on substations near Odessa, repair crews restored partial power within 48 hours, using components flown in from Poland and Germany. The question now is, who can endure more before something, or someone, breaks? Will Ukraine's capacity for adaptation outlast Russia's patience and firepower? Or will the steady attrition of infrastructure and resources gradually sap Ukraine's ability to fight? Forget the idea of swift victories or dramatic breakthroughs. This conflict has become a contest of endurance, systems, and sheer willpower. The real story is not about lightning offensives, but about the slow, methodical wearing down of the enemy's capacity to resist. Consider the historical parallels. During the siege of Leningrad in World War II, the city's defenders survived nearly 900 days of encirclement and bombardment by constant adaptation, constructing makeshift power plants, rationing food, and maintaining morale through propaganda and cultural events. In Ukraine today, similar strategies are employed. Municipalities have set up warming centers, distributed emergency food rations, and launched public information campaigns to keep spirits high. The Russian campaign, meanwhile, has become systematic. The focus is no longer on seizing territory overnight, but on eroding Ukraine's foundation by targeting logistics, maintenance hubs, and the entire energy grid. Each strike on a fuel depot or power station is a small step in a broader strategy to exhaust Ukraine's reserves and strain its defenses. As resources dwindle, the political strain mounts. Ukrainian leaders face growing questions from their population and international partners about how long the fight can be sustained. Support from allies, while still strong, is not infinite. In Washington, Berlin, and London, debates continue over the scale and duration of aid. The specter of negotiations, concessions, or ultimatums looms larger with every passing month. This moment echoes critical junctures in past conflicts. During the Vietnam War, for example, the United States faced mounting pressure at home as the costs of continued involvement grew. In the First World War, the endless attrition of the Western Front forced all sides to eventually seek a political solution when exhaustion became overwhelming. In Ukraine, we may be approaching a similar inflection point. For outside observers, the greatest risk is to misinterpret the slow, grinding nature of this war. It is tempting to seize on fleeting victories or despair over temporary setbacks. But the reality is that the outcome will be decided by the cumulative effects of many small, often invisible developments, by which side can better withstand the erosion of war and adapt before their systems collapse. Thus, every battlefield decision, every diplomatic maneuver, and every logistical adaptation now carries enormous weight. The consequences will resonate not only in Ukraine, but across Europe and the wider world. This war will not be decided by a single dramatic event or headline. As in many historical campaigns of attrition, true strategy demands patience, precision, and unyielding persistence. The true measure of progress is not in kilometers gained or lost, but in the survival and function of the systems that keep the war effort alive. What unfolds before us is not just a clash of firepower, but a calculated campaign to wear down Ukraine's very capacity to resist. While the world's attention is fixed on missile strikes and armored advances, the real contest is being waged in the shadowy realm of logistics, infrastructure, and morale. Every blackout, every collapsed bridge, every shattered rail line is another blow to the backbone of Ukraine's resistance. The intention is not spectacle, but strangulation, to make each new shipment of ammunition a little harder to deliver, each battalion's movement a little slower, each day's defense a little more desperate. Recognizing this pattern is essential for anyone hoping to understand the trajectory of the war. In an age addicted to fast results and sensational headlines, it is easy to miss the slow, methodical pressure that often decides wars of attrition. Momentum rarely turns on a single moment. Instead, it shifts as the weight of many unglamorous setbacks accumulates. This is why patience, resilience, and adaptability matter as much as technical brilliance or battlefield heroics. For outside observers, the key is to read between the lines. Where is real progress measured? Not just in visible victories, but in whose supply lines still run, whose factories still operate, whose soldiers retain the will and means to keep going. The stakes are immense. The way we interpret these slow, strategic shifts shapes government policy, public opinion, and the morale of entire nations. Misreading the subtle balance can waste precious resources, generate false hope, or worse, provoke reckless escalation. As this campaign grinds on, one question looms above all others. Who can survive the pressure, adapt to new tactics, and defend the vital arteries that keep their war effort alive? Historical precedent suggests that wars of attrition rarely end with a decisive military victory. More often, they conclude when one side's system, military, economic, or political, can no longer bear the strain. In the First World War, it was the exhaustion of German resources and morale that forced an armistice. In the Cold War, the relentless economic and technological competition eventually undermined the Soviet Union's capacity to compete. For Ukraine, the coming months will be defined by this same test of endurance. The outcome will hinge not only on the bravery of soldiers at the front, but on the adaptability of engineers, the ingenuity of logisticians, the resolve of leaders, and the unity of international partners. What practical steps can Ukraine and its allies take to enhance resilience? First, further dispersal of critical infrastructure, moving production out of known locations and into smaller, less conspicuous sites, can reduce the impact of individual strikes. Second, strengthening cross-border repair and supply networks will ensure that damaged equipment can be restored quickly and efficiently. Third, investing in mobile and renewable energy sources can mitigate the effects of targeted blackouts, keeping essential systems running even when the main grid is damaged. On the diplomatic front, maintaining clear communication and unity among allies is crucial. Diversifying sources of aid, sharing intelligence, and coordinating responses to new threats can help prevent the erosion of support. Domestically, continuing efforts to bolster civilian morale through transparent communication, public engagement, and visible reconstruction can help sustain the population's will to resist. For Russia, the challenge is to weigh the benefits of continued attrition against the risks of escalation or international backlash. History is replete with examples where a strategy of gradual strangulation backfired by galvanizing greater resistance or triggering intervention. In the end, the war in Ukraine will be shaped not by single moments of drama, but by the relentless contest of systems, strategies, and wills. The final outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The side that best adapts to the grinding demands of attrition and sustains its vital systems under pressure will shape not only the fate of Ukraine, but the security architecture of Europe for generations to come. As we watch the unfolding drama, remember to look beyond the headlines and explosions. The real battle is fought in the shadows, in the repair shops, the supply convoys, and the hearts and minds of millions. Only by understanding this deeper struggle can we truly grasp what is at stake and what the future may hold.